Turning to our next story, before there was Whitey Bulger, there was the Animal. That was the nickname for Joseph Barbosa, one of Boston's most vicious mafia men. Growing up in New Bedford, he quickly became a player in Boston's criminal underworld. Despite his reputation for mayhem and brutality, the FBI cultivated him as an informant, something both he and the Bureau would later have to answer for. It's all in Casey Sherman's new book, Animal: The Bloody Rise and Fall of the Mob's Most Feared Assassin. And Casey Sherman is here. Welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me back.
Wow. I mean, I remember this story because, in the 70s and 80s, and,
Certainly.
we look back at him a lot. But, I mean, there's almost parts of this that made me feel sorry for him.
Well,
I mean, he had a tough childhood.
He was a very complex character, and how does an animal become the animal? And he was really born into a life of violence.
His father was an animal.
His father was an animal. One of the earliest reflections that his older brother had was seeing his father knock his mother's teeth out while holding the baby Joe in her arms. So that led to an entire life of crime.
And he grew up, all these horrible things he did in the neighborhood. You got to tell the cream pie incident.
Oh, God. Yeah. Well, I mean, he was 13 years old and breaking into houses throughout the New Bedford area. And, usually it was either to get jewelry or it was revenge for teachers that had done him wrong in the classroom. And they called them the cream pie bandits because there was material smeared on walls, etc., that the police later gave to the media. And it, created this allure of this young tough in New Bedford, and he grew from there.
Yeah. He wanted to be part of La Cosa Nostra, which was a Sicilian group. He was not Sicilian. He was
Portuguese. And you know what? I approached the book that way. I thought of it as a class struggle. I remembered hearing early on in my life those old stories about Joseph Kennedy as a student at Harvard University who couldn't get into those Protestant clubs because he was Irish and he was Catholic. And it drove him. Well, the same thing happened in Barbosa's life, only the mafia was Joe Barbosa's Harvard club. He just thought if he was the most proficient killer that the mob had ever seen, they would waive that rule of ethnicity, but they never did.
One of the things about him, you were saying that, we have just reams and reams of material on him. We've got video that goes way back. We have him testifying. We have that, I think he was being debriefed in a police report. There was testimony before Congress.
Right.
So you could really hear him and listen to him.
Oh, you could, and you really get a full understanding of the man and just how fierce and fearsome he was at the time. And, it's funny, when early on in his career, no photographer in any of the Boston newspapers would take a photo credit when they'd take his picture because he was publicity shy. As he became a witness in some of these high-profile trials, he really fed on that, and he had his own agenda at work. He wanted to write his own book eventually, and sure enough, he's in Congress testifying against, of all people, Frank Sinatra in many ways.
He spent more than half of his adult life in prison, but he was constantly figuring out a way to get out and cutting deals here and there. In the end, he had this, you opened the book with this story. I didn't know that.
Thatcher Island.
He was in the witness protection program on Thatcher Island with his wife and
children.
Daughter.
Yeah, exactly. Martin Scorsese can't make up a scene like that where a gangster is being kept on an island.
Where is that?
That's right off of Gloucester, actually. There's two lighthouses. I've spent some time on Thatcher Island.
And it was
just
a
to
horror
get
at the time. It was filled with rats.
Oh, exactly.
And
It still is, but it's a nature reserve, but it's not a great place to visit. And you had the mafia, led by Raymond Patriarca, hiring snipers with speedboats to kill him.
Story.
And it's just a great way to open a book like that, and it just shows he was always on the run, always fighting a war against the mafia. And sure enough, the FBI shows up in prison while he's there and says, "Can you help us take these men down?" And that's what he does.
He got his wish.
Oh, he did.
He ended up being part of the mafia.
Well, he did in a way. They would never let him physically in, but his legend has grown much beyond several of the known mafia members. And the great thing, the reason why I wrote the book was because it's a great story arc. It's the rise and fall of Joe Barbosa. Joe Barbosa killed 26 men in the bloodiest mob war in really American history. 57 men killed in a span of 3.5 years. That never happened in Capone, Chicago. That never happened in New York. That happened in Boston. Then he becomes the first gangster to testify against La Cosa Nostra in a criminal trial. Never happened before. And then they create the witness protection program for him, but eventually he can't outrun the mafia, and they get him in the end.
Who gave him the nickname, the Animal?
Well, that's mob lore. You never know who exactly pointed at him and called him the Animal. I'm sure it was several people, but the story I tell in the book is how he ripped off the ear of a rival at a mob-controlled bar in Revere and spit it back on the bar and told the people, look, I didn't use my hands because...
Oh, that was an unbelievable story you tell right in the beginning. That was disgusting.
Right. It is, but it's part of that world, and you have to really kind of embrace it and understand it. But, there were two sides to Joe Barbosa. He was a killer, but he was a husband, and he was a father of 2 young children, and trying to make it all work for him and them, and of course it couldn't work in the end.
So when he was taken down, he was allegedly still part of the witness protection program.
Well,
he was in Chicago or California?
He was in California. Yeah. They sent him to Santa Rosa, California, but they don't understand that his nickname is the Animal. What's he going to do in witness protection? He kills again. And then they can't protect him anymore. His real identity is exposed. He's put on trial in California for this murder. The FBI shows up and they testify on his behalf. They actually worked against the local sheriff's department in California to destroy evidence against Barbosa, to help protect Barbosa, because they wanted to use Joe Barbosa to take down mafia families all over America, because he'd say anything they wanted him to say. He lied on the stand repeatedly, and he was a great foil for them. But Barbosa goes to prison. He gets out in late 1975. In early 1976, the Boston Mafia, they know where he is. Jerry Angiulo, who was running the Boston mob at the time, he's fearful of Joe Barbosa because he thinks Barbosa's just crazy enough to come back to Boston and try to take him on. That's why he sends 2 hitmen out to San Francisco to seal the deal. It's
a wild, wild tale. All right. Casey Sherman, Animal! I'm Joseph Barbosa. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.